There's a version of sports coverage that lives entirely on the surface. The press conference, the transaction wire, the carefully worded statement released on a Tuesday afternoon when the news cycle is quiet enough to absorb it without too much friction. That version is clean, it's manageable, and it almost never tells you what's actually happening. The real story lives somewhere else. It lives in the half-second pause before a response, in the specific word someone reaches for when their prepared answer runs out of room, in the moment a person who has spent months constructing a very particular version of events says something that doesn't quite fit inside that version anymore. Not dramatically, not with a headline attached to it, just a quiet slip, a sentence that lands differently than everything around it, and if you're paying attention, you feel it immediately. That's what's been happening in Cleveland. For the better part of 6 months, the analysts and reporters who cover this franchise most closely, the people who have lived inside the diplomatic language of open competition and developmental timelines and Watson's possible return to form, started saying things that no longer fit neatly inside the story they'd been telling, gradually, almost imperceptibly, the way the truth tends to work its way through when a carefully maintained narrative finally runs out of space to contain it. And underneath all of that polished framing, if you were willing to sit with it long enough and turn it over carefully enough, you could hear something beginning to fall apart. This is that story. And to tell it properly, we have to go back to where the thread actually starts. It's a standard quarterback evaluation, the kind of structured, familiar conversation that happens constantly during an NFL offseason. Analysts who watch tape for a living, who have spent real time with this team and this roster, sitting down to assess what they actually believe rather than what the official organizational language requires them to say publicly. The question directed at Titus is specific, not philosophical, not a framing exercise, a direct answerable question with a yes somewhere in it and a no somewhere else. By 2026, will Shedeur Sanders be among the top 20 quarterbacks in this league? And the response from someone who has put in hundreds of hours on this tape, who watches this team every day, was a purposeful refusal to engage. Not confusion, not unpreparedness, a deliberate, well-informed decision to say he wasn't going to answer that until after the draft. He needed to see the full picture first. Draft capital changes things. New weapons change a quarterback's capability. Lock into a number too early and you're evaluating a version of the situation that doesn't actually exist yet. It was reasonable enough. The logic held just long enough to give it some breathing room. Wait for the infrastructure, wait for the surrounding pieces, then make the call. Then April arrived, and Cleveland didn't make quiet, cautious adjustments. They declared themselves. What Cleveland did in the offseason wasn't a soft endorsement. It wasn't the kind of incremental roster shuffling that front offices use when they want to project confidence without actually committing to anything. This was a statement made in the language that NFL organizations use when they actually mean what they're saying. Real money, deliberate investment, a front office using its resources to communicate something specific about what it believes and who it's building around. The offensive line, one of the most embarrassing liabilities in the entire league the previous season, a unit that had made it structurally impossible to evaluate what the quarterback behind it was actually capable of, got rebuilt from the foundation. Zion Johnson and Titus Howard came in not as project players or depth pieces brought in to fill a roster spot, but as genuine upgrades designed to change what the line could actually do on a down-to-down basis. At receiver, Isaiah Bond, Denzel Boston, and Casey Compson were added, players with real upside, guys who can win routes and finish plays at the top of them rather than forcing a quarterback to make miracles out of situations where the ball has no business going. George Warhop got the green light on a scheme specifically designed to maximize what that rebuilt line could do. This wasn't tinkering, this was an organizational commitment delivered with receipts, and what those receipts said was unambiguous. We are building this around a quarterback. We are dedicated to making this work. We are spending like we believe in what we have.
Titus had said he needed to see the full picture before he answered the question. Cleveland delivered the full picture, And when the same panel reconvened 4 months later and the same question came back around, the answer came with it. Yes, Shedeur Sanders has a real shot at ranking among the top 20 quarterbacks in this league in the upcoming season. But that's not the part of the answer that matters most. In my experience with this kind of analysis, the caveat is almost always where the real information lives. And the caveat this time was 3 words: accept the layup. It would be easy to hear accept the layup as a technical note, a coaching point, the kind of mechanical feedback that gets attached to every young quarterback's evaluation because there's always something to clean up, always some aspect of the game that needs refinement before the full picture can come into focus. That's not what this was. What Titus was pointing at isn't a footwork issue. It's not a misread in the progression. It's not something that gets corrected through film sessions or repetition or a new system's terminology clicking into place. What he was identifying goes deeper than mechanics. It goes to the level of competitive wiring, the internal operating system that determines how a quarterback processes a moment when the game is elevated and the decision in front of him is the difference between something adequate and something extraordinary. Shedeur Sanders is built to choose the extraordinary. That's not a criticism wrapped in diplomatic language. It's a real description of how he's wired. In a 3rd and 5 scenario where the correct decision, the statistically sound, drive-sustaining, defense-respecting decision is the 10-yard completion that moves the chains and keeps the offense in rhythm, Shedeur's instinct is to locate the vertical shot. The throw that, if everything goes exactly as planned, produces something that makes people stop what they're doing and watch. He finds his home in the elevated moment. He's drawn to the challenge the way some people are drawn to difficult problems, not because the safe answer isn't visible, but because the harder answer is more interesting. At Colorado, that instinct was something to witness. Watching him play in college was like watching someone operating at a frequency just slightly above the defenders around him. Back foot throws under real duress with a defender draped across him. Deep balls on 3rd and long when the defensive coordinator had already called the coverage to take it away because he knew exactly what was coming. The decision to enter a competitive window that most quarterbacks would look at and consciously avoid. That's what people fell in love with. That's what generated the genuine excitement around him. It was real, it was thrilling, and it produced some of the most electric moments college football had seen in years. But the NFL is specifically designed to punish that instinct when it isn't supported by the right infrastructure. Defensive coordinators in this league spend entire weeks of preparation focused on the extra half second a quarterback burns while he's searching for the game-changing play instead of the game-managing one. Pass rushers train specifically to survive inside that void. And during Shedeur's rookie season, he kept pursuing that instinct in circumstances where the pieces around him simply couldn't meet him there. He kept trusting receivers to win contested routes at the top of deep patterns in situations where those receivers were overmatched, undersupported, and working behind one of the worst offensive lines in the conference. The mismatch wasn't a talent problem, it was a vision versus reality problem. His competitive vision was operating at one level. What the surrounding pieces could actually execute was operating at a completely different one. The argument that Cleveland's off-season investment creates is that enough of those surrounding pieces have now changed that the same instincts, the same vision, the same competitive wiring that created mismatches last year begins producing something completely different when the infrastructure finally matches what the quarterback has been trying to build toward. That's a genuinely compelling argument, and I think it's largely correct. But something happened in that conversation right after the case for Shedeur was being built that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. The Watson topic came up mid-panel. It always does. It has to, because as long as Deshaun Watson is under contract and on this roster and nominally competing for the starting position, any honest conversation about the Cleveland quarterback situation has to account for him. So someone introduced the scenario. What happens if Watson wins the competition? If that's the outcome, what does Cleveland actually look like?
I want you to notice something about that question before we even get to the responses it generated. The word is if, not when Watson takes back the starting job, not should Watson win, he will start the season, if. I understand the instinct to frame that as standard journalistic balance. Responsible sports media covers both sides of a competition. You present each possibility with equal weight because until the competition is decided, you don't actually know the outcome. That's the reflexive explanation. And for a reporter who doesn't have deep institutional knowledge of this franchise, it might even be accurate. But these are not casual observers exercising standard editorial caution. These are people embedded in the daily reality of this organization, people who understand the financial architecture of Watson's contract, who know what a $185 million commitment does to the institutional psychology of a front office, who have watched this organization publicly tie its identity, its credibility, and years of organizational sacrifice to the premise that Watson would eventually become the player that investment assumed he was. For those people, not casual observers, but people with real, sustained, granular knowledge of everything this franchise has put into the Watson project, to automatically reach for if instead of when is not an editorial choice, it's a tell. It means that in private, in the conversations that don't happen on camera or in prepared statements, they have already considered the real possibility that Shedeur Sanders isn't just a developmental story being carefully managed until the moment the organization decides he's ready. They've considered that he might actually be the answer, even if the organization's public direction and the competition's official outcome don't end up pointing in the same place. That single word told me more about where this story was actually heading than 6 months of official press conference language had managed to communicate. And then Titus said something I genuinely wasn't ready for. He said that if Watson wins this competition, Watson will need to replicate the confidence and belief that Shedeur Sanders already brought to the Cleveland huddle last season. Read that again slowly because I think it's worth sitting with. Not outperform Shedeur statistically, not demonstrate a more sophisticated grasp of the new offensive system, not show better game management or cleaner ball security or a more mature read of what the defense is presenting. Replicate what the rookie already brought to that offense. The feeling in a huddle that the game was still winnable, the current that moved through.
I want you to notice something about that question before we even get to the responses it generated. The word is if, not when Watson takes back the starting job, not should Watson win, he will start the season, if. I understand the instinct to frame that as standard journalistic balance. Responsible sports media covers both sides of a competition. You present each possibility with equal weight because until the competition is decided, you don't actually know the outcome. That's the reflexive explanation. And for a reporter who doesn't have deep institutional knowledge of this franchise, it might even be accurate. But these are not casual observers exercising standard editorial caution. These are people embedded in the daily reality of this organization, people who understand the financial architecture of Watson's contract, who know what a $185 million commitment does to the institutional psychology of a front office, who have watched this organization publicly tie its identity, its credibility, and years of organizational sacrifice to the premise that Watson would eventually become the player that investment assumed he was. For those people, not casual observers, but people with real, sustained, granular knowledge of everything this franchise has put into the Watson project, to automatically reach for if instead of when is not an editorial choice, it's a tell. It means that in private, in the conversations that don't happen on camera or in prepared statements, they have already considered the real possibility that Shedeur Sanders isn't just a developmental story being carefully managed until the moment the organization decides he's ready. They've considered that he might actually be the answer, even if the organization's public direction and the competition's official outcome don't end up pointing in the same place. That single word told me more about where this story was actually heading than 6 months of official press conference language had managed to communicate. And then Titus said something I genuinely wasn't ready for.
He said that if Watson wins this competition, Watson will need to replicate the confidence and belief that Shedeur Sanders already brought to the Cleveland huddle last season. Read that again slowly, because I think it's worth sitting with. Not outperform Shedeur statistically, not demonstrate a more sophisticated grasp of the new offensive system, not show better game management or cleaner ball security, or a more mature read of what the defense is presenting. Replicate what the rookie already brought to that offense. The feeling in a huddle that the game was still winnable. The current that moved through 10 other grown professional football players when their quarterback looked at them and projected a certainty, not manufactured, not performed, but genuinely felt and genuinely communicated that things were going to go right. Watson would need to go find what Shedeur Sanders was already delivering as a first-year player in the most structurally compromised version of his professional situation. That's what the standard was set at, not what Watson had done at his best, not what the contract assumed he was capable of, what a rookie had already shown up and done behind a broken offensive line with receivers who couldn't consistently win at the top of routes. I think it's tempting to absorb that as a compliment and move on. Shedeur's a good kid, he's got moxie, he competed hard. And then you turn back to the real conversation about statistics and scheme fit and organizational investment. Don't do that. Think about what it means for an analyst who has been living inside the carefully maintained public framing of this story to say that out loud, on the record. For most of Shedeur's rookie year, the dominant narrative was built entirely around limitations, what he still needed to develop, where his unpolished game created problems, what he was not yet capable of doing consistently enough to build an offense around. That was the lens. Nearly every public evaluation was conducted inside that framework, and Titus, who helped construct that framework, just stepped completely outside of it and stated that despite all of those limitations, despite the line that couldn't hold a pocket and the receivers who kept letting his best throws die, Shedeur Sanders walked into that huddle and gave 10 professional football players something that Deshaun Watson, with his enormous contract and his years of experience and everything this organization had sacrificed to make his tenure work, would have to find a way to match. I know how easy it is to dismiss leadership presence and huddle belief as soft variables in a sport that prides itself on quantifiable performance. I understand the instinct to wave it off, but in professional football, it is one of the most concrete differences between quarterbacks who consistently win games they have no business winning and quarterbacks who consistently lose games they should be in full control of.
Tom Brady's late-game comebacks against double-digit deficits weren't primarily about scheme or preparation. They were about the chemical change that moved through a huddle when a quarterback entered it carrying a specific kind of certainty. Not bravado, not false confidence. A genuine, almost biological conviction that the situation was manageable, that the next series was going to be different, that the game was still alive. And because he believed it with enough clarity and enough force, the people around him began to believe it too. Patrick Mahomes operates in exactly that space right now. It's not mythology, it's not branding. It cannot be installed through coaching or guaranteed through contract language or summoned by organizational pressure at a critical moment. A quarterback has it or he doesn't. It runs on something deeper than mechanics. Shedeur Sanders had it as a rookie, in the worst possible circumstances. That is not a personality note or a soft observation to be filed away under intangibles. In the full ledger of his evaluation, it is one of the hardest facts on the page. That number kept surfacing throughout the conversation, not once, not as a passing reference, but repeatedly, with an insistence that nobody in the room could quite neutralize, because every single time it came up, someone had to construct a fresh argument for why it shouldn't be the deciding factor, why the money wasn't relevant to the competitive evaluation, why the financial history of the decision shouldn't color the football decision being made right now. And the fact that the argument kept needing to be reconstructed from scratch was itself the most honest thing anyone said about it. Dustin finally named it directly. He said it without diplomatic cushioning or careful framing. The money is gone. The check has cleared.
It has vanished from the equation in every way that should matter when you're deciding which quarterback gives this football team the best chance to win games in 2026. And allowing the magnitude of that financial commitment to function as a deciding factor in a quarterback competition that should be decided entirely on football merit is a trap. A well-documented, frequently repeated, deeply embarrassing trap that NFL organizations fall into with a regularity that should cause far more public shame than it actually does. It has a name: sunk cost psychology. The process by which an organization continues investing in a failing position, not because the evidence supports ongoing investment, but because reversing course requires publicly acknowledging that a foundational decision was catastrophically wrong. The psychological pull toward honoring a bad investment with more investment grows in direct proportion to how large the original commitment was. Watson's contract is among the largest in the history of the position. The gravitational pull to justify it with playing time rather than acknowledging the error and moving forward with what the evidence actually supports is enormous. It is real, and it has already cost this franchise years. Resist it. That was Dustin's message. Strip away the contract noise entirely. Remove the financial history from the evaluation. Look only at what each quarterback has actually demonstrated he can do for this specific team in this specific environment. On Watson's side of that ledger, 3 genuinely good games. Not 3 strong seasons, not inspiring stretches of play spread across years of organizational sacrifice and rebuilt rosters and patient fan bases and public declarations of commitment. 3 games. That is what $185 million has produced in terms of on-field performance that this organization can actually point to and build a case around. On Shedeur's side, a rookie playing behind a broken offensive line with receivers who couldn't consistently win at the top of routes, in the most structurally unfavorable circumstances a young quarterback can be placed in, still generating real belief in that offense, still walking into huddles at the end of games and giving 10 professional athletes the sense that the drive was moving forward, still competing. That is the unadorned comparison. Pick which foundation you want to build the 2026 season on. The case for Watson that kept resurfacing, the one that generated the most genuine traction in the room, even among people who were skeptical of the overall argument, was built around urgency. The idea that a man who can feel his career ending, who knows that this competition is the last door and that no restructured contract or renewed organizational patience is waiting on the other side of it, finds something within himself that comfort and security never produced. That desperation sharpens what had grown dull while the position was protected. That the fully realized, maximally competitive version of Deshaun Watson finally shows up now precisely because there is nothing left to protect.
I don't completely dismiss that. In professional sports, urgency produces real changes. There is genuine precedent for it. People have found things under terminal pressure that they couldn't locate when the stakes were lower. The argument isn't ridiculous on its face, but every time I tried to build it into a genuinely convincing case for Deshaun Watson specifically, I kept running into the same unavoidable question. What was Cleveland getting during the years when none of that was at risk? When the contract established a structural security that no amount of organizational disappointment could penetrate? When Watson's position was as protected as a position can be in professional football? When the expectation of patience and the institutional investment in his success created a cushion that insulated him from the real consequences of underperformance? If the maximum, fully committed, urgency-sharpened version of Deshaun Watson only surfaces right now at the absolute terminal edge when retirement is the immediate alternative, what exactly is the explanation for all of those seasons? What was that? If urgency is the answer, it is also the indictment. And I'm not sure the Watson argument survives both of those things being true simultaneously. There's also the scheme argument. The claim that Watson's struggles in Cleveland were primarily a function of philosophical misalignment between his natural processing style and what Kevin Stefanski's offense required of him. That a different coordinator with a different system removes the constraint and the real Watson finally emerges. It might partially explain something, but Baker Mayfield ran the same scheme, in the same city, behind the same organizational structure, with the same offensive infrastructure. And Mayfield, a quarterback who doesn't generate serious top 10 conversations, a player with well-documented and widely acknowledged limitations, came one game away from the Super Bowl running the Stefanski system in Cleveland. The scheme worked. With a different quarterback, it worked. Whatever the variable was that separated Deshaun Watson's Cleveland tenure from what Mayfield produced in the same environment, the playbook was not it. And nothing a new offensive coordinator brings in terms of terminology or conceptual framing addresses something that lives at a level more fundamental than play design. Here's the developmental pattern that holds more consistently than almost any other in NFL quarterback history. The biggest leap doesn't happen between year 2 and year 3. It doesn't come after a full offseason with an established starter's role and a coaching staff built around maximizing your development. The biggest leap, the one that changes what a quarterback actually is rather than just refining the version that already exists, happens between year 1 and year 2. And the reason it happens isn't external. It isn't about the additional film study or the voluntary throwing sessions or the camp reps with new receivers. It's about something that cannot be manufactured or accelerated or acquired through preparation alone. It happens because you've lived it, because you experienced the real weight of an NFL season, the actual hits, the real mistakes made under actual pressure, the specific chaos of an NFL defense that has spent a week preparing specifically to take away what you do best. And you came out the other side of it with an internal understanding of what that weight feels like that you simply cannot develop any other way. There's a slowdown in the game that happens for quarterbacks who have truly survived an NFL season. The speed that felt genuinely overwhelming in week 1 of your rookie year doesn't disappear, but your relationship to it changes. You stop reacting to it and start processing inside of it. You develop an internal clock calibrated to professional football rather than any other level of the game. And that clock was built by actual experience rather than simulated preparation. Shedeur Sanders did all of that last year. He absorbed an entire NFL season in the most limited version of his professional circumstances. He took everything that came with it, and despite all of it, the line that couldn't protect him, the receivers that couldn't finish for him, the structural limitations that made it nearly impossible to fairly evaluate what he was actually capable of, he still managed to generate real belief in that offense. Now the line holds. The receivers can actually win the routes he's been asking them to win. The game has already slowed down in the way that only a real season produces. And the question, the one that will get answered on camera regardless of what was paid, promised, or said at any press conference, is what he does when the infrastructure finally matches the vision.
The coaching dynamic that people closest to this team keep returning to when they describe what this season's development looks like isn't complicated. It doesn't require elaborate tactical analysis. Todd Monken communicates with a directness that doesn't leave much room for misinterpretation. He says what he means. He delivers the message without burying it in diplomatic language until the actual content has been hollowed out. And the message directed specifically at Shedeur is essentially this: when the situation calls for efficiency, stop paying the premium for ambition. Trust the completion you can make, not the completion you wish you could attempt. When the layup is available, take the layup. The drive that stays alive on a 10-yard completion in 3rd and 5 is more valuable to this offense than the incomplete deep ball that would have been spectacular if everything had gone exactly right. That is the specific correction that the "accept the layup" caveat was pointing toward. And the reason the development arc from here looks so genuinely promising is that Shedeur is starting from a position that most young quarterbacks who need that correction aren't starting from. He's already generating real belief. He's already walking into huddles and changing the temperature of the room. He's already demonstrated the intangible that can't be installed from the outside. The correction being asked of him is mechanical and decision-based. Learn to take what's there instead of always hunting for what could be. That is a learnable adjustment, especially for a player whose character and competitive intelligence, based on everything observed about him so far, suggests he has the self-awareness to actually receive honest feedback and act on it. A player who already has the thing that can't be taught, being coached by someone willing to say directly what needs to change, that development arc accelerates significantly from wherever it was already heading. When I step back and look at this whole picture without forcing myself to be artificially fair to both sides in a way that distorts what the evidence actually shows, this is what I keep arriving at. The analysts who spent months constructing the meticulous, diplomatically balanced version of this story, the open competition narrative, the Watson redemption arc, the carefully managed developmental timeline for the rookie, have started saying things in the middle of conversations that don't fit inside that story anymore. Not because they've abandoned professionalism or lost editorial control, because the honest evaluation has started breaking through the prepared framing in the way that honest evaluations eventually always do. The acknowledgement that what Shedeur already provided to that offense is the standard Watson will need to meet, not the other way around, is not a minor concession. It is the entire frame of the conversation being quietly, almost reluctantly reversed. The automatic reach for if instead of when introducing the Watson scenario is not journalistic balance. From people with that level of institutional knowledge, it is a private conclusion leaking into public language. The insistence that the $185 million is irrelevant to the football evaluation, the fact that this argument keeps needing to be made, keeps needing to be rebuilt, keeps needing to be defended against the gravitational pull of the financial history, tells you exactly how much work is being done to keep the competition framed as genuinely open when the evidence has already started pointing somewhere specific. None of this is certain. The ball gets snapped. The camera captures it. The truth gets recorded on film before any of it becomes public, regardless of what was paid or promised or carefully worded in any press conference. The coaches will see it in practice before the rest of us see any version of it. The players will feel it on those spontaneous Thursday afternoon moments that don't exist outside the building. But based on what the people closest to this situation have started saying when their carefully maintained selves momentarily step aside, based on what's been slipping through the prepared framing in the pauses and the word choices and the sentences that land differently than everything around them, the conversation has already turned. They know what's in those huddles. They've seen what the rookie brought to that offense in the worst possible circumstances. They've watched the organization spend $100 million communicating what it believes. And when the language of the people who know this story best starts shifting, quietly, gradually, without a single headline attached to it, that's not noise. That's the story breaking through.